Hi and welcome to another game video, and in today's video I want to compare a emulation device. Now this is my Anbernic RG35XXH with my PlayStation Vita Slim, and I'll show you why I'm comparing these in a little while, but just a little bit of background for this video. I was after an emulation device, and I asked this question: do I just use my PS Vita or do I go and buy this one in particular, which is an Anbernic RG35XXH? And it was mixed views. Now the PS Vita is a decent, powerful device. Let's see if I've only got a charge in this. Yes, I have. And it's a fantastic console. I've run custom firmware on this, so I can run lots of different systems, emulators, etc. I mean, it's a rock solid console. The controls are absolutely superb. You've got your twin sticks, and I was using it for all sorts of things like Game Boy, Super Nintendo. Actually, let's just have a look what I've got on here. I have an emulation bubble somewhere. So I've got Adrenaline, so that's a PSP emulator. MGBA for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance. New DS for playing DS games. Doesn't do that very well. Flycast for playing Dreamcast games. Doesn't do that very well. And then RetroArch for, well, one of those sort of cover-all emulators. And it's good. It's fantastic for up to about 16-bit, and then it starts to show its age. So I was pulling sort of silly faces when I was talking about Flycast and New DS. The New DS barely runs whatsoever. You're getting sort of 5 to 10 frames per second, and it really is a hit and miss. Flycast, it's usable, but it really is quite slow. To be able to use it, you're supposed to overclock Vita, and I still couldn't get it to run properly, even though I was pushing my Vita to 500 megahertz. And so that is one of the downfalls, and that is why I started looking at different emulation devices, because as lovely as the Vita is, and as powerful as it is for, well, Vita games, N64 games, that sort of thing, that's about its limit. We're talking, this is a 10-year-old, 11-year-old console. For doing what it's supposed to do, like Vita games, they are absolutely awesome. Things like Little Big Planet, Wipeout, the Uncharted games, they look absolutely superb. But when it comes to emulating other devices, it starts to fall apart. And I was particularly looking for a device that would play sort of Dreamcast games, and this does. So that's why I stepped away from sort of emulating on my Vita, because I mean, if you're into 8-bit, 16-bit games, then the Vita is absolutely fantastic. But something like this is the RG35XXH. It will do all of that and so much more. So it does NES, SNES, Master System, Mega Drive. But then it will also step that up. It will do N64, Sega Saturn, Sega Dreamcast. It will do some arcade systems. There are even some PC ports that have been brought across. So, as much as I love the Vita, I mean, it's for Vita games, there is no comparison, and that is one area that this falls. It won't do PlayStation Vita. It just isn't powerful enough. This is a pure emulation device, but it goes way beyond the capabilities of the Vita. So like I said, this kind of stops about Dreamcast. You're very lucky if you can get it to run Dreamcast. This thing runs absolutely superb at sort of full 60 frames per second. So it depends on what devices you're looking to emulate, and perhaps if you've already had one of these like I did. It depends on where you are sitting. If you're looking to go out and buy a device just to play emulation on, and you don't own either of these, then I wouldn't suggest going out and buying a PlayStation Vita. go and buy a dedicated handheld machine. If you've already got a PS Vita and you're looking at doing sort of 16-bit, possibly a bit of 32-bit gaming, then you might find that the Vita covers it. And if you've already got one, it's no expense. Install custom firmware, check out the emulators, see what you think. But for proper dedicated handheld emulation, I don't think you can go wrong with something like this. It also comes down to price point, because a Vita is a very specific console, very expensive. I think they're sitting around about the £130 mark, and then you've got to go through the hassle of installing custom firmware, and that's no easy task on a Vita. It's a lot easier than it used to be, but it's still full of its issues. Whereas this, you get it out of the box, it's crammed full of ROMs, and you can go on off and play within seconds. So I asked a question about a year ago, I think, probably 6 months ago. I'd already had a Vita, I hadn't bought this yet. Which one should I use for emulation? And it depends on the systems that you want to use. So I want to use more than just 16-bit, and so this is where it starts to fall, the Vita, whereas I've been very happy with my little RG35XXH, which I think is turned off right now. Oh, there you go. And it's straight up a lovely device. It's smaller-ish than the Vita, so yeah, in length, really, that's hard. Right. Lengthwise, it's shorter and stumpier. It's a bit thinner, sort of height-wise. It's probably about the same thickness. You've got the sticks on it, so there's probably not much difference in it. I would say the Anbernic is just a bit thicker, but for pure emulation and for playing far more, I mean, it is a no-brainer. It's got more CPU and more RAM than this. So if you don't own either of these devices, or you don't own a Vita, I wouldn't specifically go out and buy a Vita just to run emulation. If you wanted a Vita for playing Vita games and a bit of emulation, then of course then the Vita is where you're at, because I'm not actually up on Vita emulation, how you can play that on other systems. It's not something I've looked into because I have a Vita, and it's the perfect way to play Vita games. So there you go. I asked whether I should buy a separate emulation device. I already owned a Vita, and the general consensus was that something like this is going to be more powerful, it's going to give you better battery life, it's going to be able to play more systems than the Vita, and it did. So I do love this. I would love to play Game Boy games on the PS Vita, maybe a bit of Super Nintendo, but for full-on emulation, you cannot beat a modern emulation device like this, or one of the many Anbernic or Mayu devices that are out there. So there you go. Vita or emulation device. It's not as straightforward, but there you go. Link, like, subscribe, enjoy.